about it, there should be a link to the stream.
Yeah, no, I can see it now, and I can see myself now as well. Right,
All right.
hold on a second.
Sweet.
There we go. Right.
Hello, how
awesome.
you doing?
Hello, hello. I have no idea what's going on now. Let's just get into. I don't usually use Discord for my streams.
Hold on. Do you want me to turn on my? Hold on.
Stuff.
Start virtual camera. Let me turn on my thing on Discord as well, so you can see me.
Awesome. There we go.
Sweet.
Right.
Hi.
I've got. So I can. It's funny, isn't it? When you can see, it makes it that much easier to sort of know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I was just staring at my own like messages, where's his voice coming from and such. But no, I can see you. I can see the chat all as well. Hello to everyone who's listening and all.
Yeah, Chapringo says hi back. So, so what do you want to know specifically, or do you just want me to go on several rants with you posing these?
So I envisioned a like sort of a discussion of sorts, right? Like because you're an anti-Trump conservative, like a Republican who quite disagrees with the current trajectory.
Oh yeah, I fucking despise the way that we're heading right now. Yeah.
Exactly right, exactly, and for good reason. And whilst I would definitely say I share that disapproval of what Trump is doing and his positions and such, I would also say that I'm probably more left wing than yourselves.
Probably.
Probably most people.
Hold on, you have your channel linked to your Discord profile, right?
Yeah. You should be able to.
I think I checked out a couple of your videos before, and I could tell that you were a little bit more to the left of me. So
just a bit,
just a bit, yeah.
But that's sort of what I was interested in, because it's an interesting perspective to still be in that sort of conservative space, that conservative way of thinking, and sort of still have opposition to someone who is quite a loud voice in Republican and conservative discourse at the moment. And for me, there's a few interesting points of analysis that I think would be interesting to explore. But obviously, I need to hear some of your thoughts first before we can get into it.
Okay, yeah.
But no, that's sort of where I'm coming from with this.
So yeah, I'm basically a never Trump Republican or a real Republican, and that basically means that I am a conservative who actually believes in like conservative values, that I'm not willing to betray them just to get someone elected into office. So I think sort of the one of the decisions that the Republican Party made in 2016, 2020, and 2024 was, are we going to betray our values in order to ensure that we win an election? And I think that this was whether they're going to be nominating Donald Trump for the office of the presidency. And whether or not you think it's a good thing that you betray your values in order to get a win, it's clearly worked. They've won in 2016. They increased the amount of votes between 2016 and 2020, even though that Biden still won. It was just due to COVID. Every single incumbent party really lost in 2020. And then in 2024, the Republican Trump won again. So I'm sort of on the side that one should not basically be betraying your own personal values in order to ensure that you win an election. Yeah, I think that's like the quintessential part of being like a never Trump Republican.
Okay, and I can that makes a lot of sense, right? Like the arrival of someone, like even just sort of the person that Donald Trump is, I think would probably make some people balk at the idea of having that sort of person as the leader of your party, let alone of the entire country.
Yeah, well,
I'd be. Sorry, go ahead, sir.
I was going to say, it makes swallowing that pill a lot easier when he achieves results, basically, or at least wins elections. That's basically the only thing that really matters in the end. If they win elections, then that pill is going to be a lot easier to swallow. But if you betray every single one of your values in order to win an election, then what's the point of winning to begin with?
I'd be conservative then as to what the conservative values that you would hold would be not met by Donald Trump, and sort of where, because this is sort of what interests me a little bit, because I agree that Trump is definitely different from what a lot of conservatives would envision as their values. I think there's definitely quite a lot of discontent with Trump from people who would still consider themselves right-wing. But exactly right. There's, I mean, just in the server, but even just like in society in general, I think you've got the sort of MAGA diehard, Trump all the way, but it's disproportionately loud. Like they're very good at being very vocal in conversations.
They're
media spotlights. They get a lot of the spotlight, but there's a lot of people who probably can't stand him but don't get the chance to say it, or certainly don't get the platform to say it. So I'd be interested in sort of hearing what the conservative opinions are which differ from version of conservatism, or where the values haven't been met, I suppose.
So the biggest thing that is, you can pretty much get everyone to agree with this, is that Trump has completely abandoned the previous economic policies of the Republican Party, that being embracing sort of laissez-faire, free trade economics. Trump has instituted historic tax increases, that being with tariffs. Like you see the Republican Party Twitter ridiculously bragging about how much income that the federal government is bringing in. And then you also see them bringing up trade barriers, which was antithetical to what the Republican Party used to be, was believing that a more unrestricted capitalist economy would perform better. Another aspect of Trump's policies that differ from republicanism, or previous republicanism, is basically limited government. So Donald Trump has instituted historic consolidation of power within the federal government, basically completely getting rid of the idea of like states' rights, and that perhaps what might be best is not for government intervention, but to take a step back and sort of just like let things play out as they should. There's also very kind of smaller examples, but they're concerning, of like violations of the First Amendment, and then violations of the Second Amendment as well. There is currently a court case going on that is being pushed by the Trump administration. Basically, that would is bringing up the question of whether felons can be restricted of owning firearms. I think that's what the specific court case was on. Now, you might disagree with this personally, as someone to the left of me, but I personally believe that even restrictions on felons from owning firearms is against the spirit of the Second Amendment. Let's see, I got a whole list of things that the Trump administration was violating here. Right. He's also violating, this is a part of the limited government thing, he's also basically trying to violate the separation of powers. There was this idea among conservatism that in order to prevent a tyrannical government, you need to separate out all of these powers, basically try to prevent as little consolidation as you can. But then we're seeing with the Trump administration that they're actively trying to interfere with Congress as well as the judicial branch. And it's very, very scary of increasing centralization. And then this is a very interesting one, is Trump's foreign policy. He ran on a foreign policy of basically America first, and we're going to go pull out of the rest of the world. But then we're also seeing sort of a betrayal, I guess, of what he was running on, which was he's actually becoming a little bit more interventionist and neoconservative. I'm a neoconservative myself. I think that having a very strong, aggressive foreign policy is probably what's going to be best to preserving the United States hegemony, basically over the world. And I think that Donald Trump was very lacking in that. But now we're starting to see a very interesting shift where he's becoming sort of more interventionist with like Venezuela and Iran. And I personally support that, but it's interesting how it's alienating his previously MAGA base, which is, we can sort of talk about how the Groypers are gaining influence later. Yeah. And then let's see here now. Right. And then the Party of Law and Order, basically Donald Trump has been instituting these historically corrupt pardonings. What the fuck was his name? That one, I think it was like a senator, or maybe he was like a representative from New York, George Santos, who got pardoned just because he was a Republican. We've seen these insane pardons, which completely destroys the idea of the Republican Party being the party of being pro-cop and pro-law and order. Of course, there's also January 6th to consider, and the pardoning of every single participant that was in January 6th, which also just completely flies in the face of being the party of law and order. And then finally, the United States national debt, which is a concern for many people in the United States. We've seen under the Trump administration, both his first and second term, the largest increase in the United States national deficit, and it's going to be very scary if we get into a debt spiral in which we just keep adding more and more debt in order to pay off the interest of the debt that we already have, and it's just going to continue expanding.
Yeah.
So these are all my list of grievances with the current Trump administration right now.
Well, let's try and go through some of them, because there was a lot there. I think actually it's quite nice that you sort of laid them all out there, because it almost lets us go through the palettes a bit at a time and sort of go back to things once you've gone through a topic and such. So a lot of that I agree with, actually. I completely agree that Trump does not care for how government is meant to function. He sort of is more interested in bulldozing his way to whatever goal he has in mind, and puts his supporters and political allies in places to ensure that. You've got MAGA affiliated politicians in Congress and in the House of Representatives and in various courtrooms, basically just kowtowing to whatever line he takes. So I completely agree that that's been bypassed. I think that he is absolutely a hypocrite on many of the things he said, and largely probably said them just to try and win a few votes to get into power and then promptly ignore. So with his arguing that he was going to support Americans first and then happy to do the opposite with his foreign policy and such. I think there's many things that you've said there which I definitely agree with. What I think is interesting, though, to analyze is the underlying reasons for why these things happen, why Trump does these things, and sort of for me the interesting, because I'm going to be a little bit critical, I'm going to sort of try and analyze this with you here from a critical element of looking at right-wing politics and such, because I think there is an element of underlying critique of the sort of conservative position that could be taken with Trump's politics and such. And obviously, hopefully that's all right with you as well, but I envision maybe there's going to be some disagreement. But,
probably going to be some disagreement. You might be surprised on how much we agree on maybe the diagnosis and the prescription. I don't know. We'll see. We'll get into it.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So the laissez-faire thing is interesting because, quite right. Republicans in the past have very much favoured the true freedom of the market, the ability for capitalists and for business to conduct itself in as much freedom as possible. And that has had mixed effects. I mean, I feel like the 20s, for instance, roaring 20s, that laissez-faire period led to Great Depression. You've got various other periods of deregulation and sort of free business spending culminating.
Well, hold on, can I push back on that a little bit? You could argue that the laissez-faire economics of the 1920s caused the Great Depression, but then the government intervention afterward, that being the raising of tariffs, as well as I think that it was affecting the interest rate on bonds, or that led to a dramatic worsening of the Depression that made it last a lot longer, made the effects much greater. So you could argue that maybe, the laissez-faire economics, not enough regulation on ensuring that corporations were real, led to the Great Depression, but the intervention afterward, which is very similar to what we're seeing with Donald Trump, which is the raising of tariffs, significantly worsened everything. So sort of
the Hoover government.
Yes, from the Hoover government. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with some of that, but my point is more that the right-wing principle of that, the deregulation of the economic conduct of society, which is a sort of typically right-wing principle, had a fairly large role in the sort of irresponsible and quite damaging way that large sections of American society and European, because we experienced
the whole world economy that kind of experienced that.
Exactly, right? Like I would never say that, it was just the Americans. Like, it's a global thing, right? But at the same time, the laissez-faire element is sort of what is being spotlighted here. And so to fast forward from the 1920s, because I don't really want to focus too much on our ancestors, if we look at what Trump has done, of course, the tariffs and the sort of nonsense, almost ego activities of saying, yeah, we're going to tariff these countries and we're going to basically go through the long list of people that Trump has grievances with and on random tariffs and charges and such activities.
It's
a lot of it,
there's not even reasons. I mean, they
exactly,
did
right?
a big list of the trade deficit, and that's how they set their tariff rate. It was completely and utterly bonkers. I mean,
exactly. A lot of it is nonsense. But underlying the element of why the tariffs are in place is an element of ism, I think, which is often underspoken. So Trump and many of his main allies in the US put these tariffs in place because in their mind, they are raising the profile and ability to compete in the market for their parties and their interests, right? If you're an American corporation that CEO has thrown its weight behind Trump, the thinking is, if all these other nations have been tariffed, I, as the American business, can sweep in and hoover up the place in the market. Now, I don't agree necessarily that is what is going to happen. I'm not going to sit here and say, yes, I support Trump's position. But the reason behind doing that, the incentive for why you would block out other countries, by sort of de facto with these tariffs and let a let a home corporation come in, is to raise the profile of the people of interest. Now, that is
kind of.
Go ahead, sorry.
I wouldn't necessarily agree. You say like they want the consolidation of corporations domestically. Is basically what you're saying, right? To basically raise up their
of allies in the domestic scene. America first.
I mean, that is a byproduct. Maybe that's the intended byproduct, for all I know, of more consolidation of power. But I think another aspect that people need to realize is the abandonment of the American worker among the left and of the right in the United States. As we've moved towards a more advanced economy, and we are moving away from domestic production as well as the mining of natural resources, there are people in those jobs that basically they feel abandoned, that even though our economy is growing due to these new sectors, it's not like a coal worker can learn coding and move from like one industry to another. So I think a large part of the tariffing was basically almost to revert ourselves to a more primitive economy, but it's sort of in reaction to the abandonment of the American worker, basically. So you could say that, Donald Trump is probably consolidating, like as tariffs are implemented, smaller industries can't compete. So there's probably going to be some sort of larger company that comes in, buys up all these smaller companies and consolidates power, and they're loyal to Trump. So that ultimately means he gains more power. But I think more looking at it in the framework of the American worker is more relevant to this discussion.
That's interesting. I mean, I actually think that is quite important. I would dispute the idea that the left has abandoned. I think Democrat Party absolutely has a large part to play in this. I completely would agree that large parts of Democrat policy have not spoken to the average American worker, but I would not label this left wing. Now, there's absolutely going to be some elements of my position coming into this, because I would say my politics are definitely far, far to the left of the average American. However, I don't think that disputes the point, because a left-wing position is one which ultimately focuses its gaze on the inequity, the inequality, the injustice. Now, the worker that is at the bottom of a corporate structure is unable to, as you've just said, right? They can't switch from the coal mine to the computer lab where they can learn how to code and such. That's because of the market forces which prevent them from being able to say, I'm going to spend X amount of time being able to, put to actually learning how to use computers to a proficient level to become enough to be hired elsewhere in the job market. And that's in part because they don't have the ability to put money aside from paying rent, healthcare bills, education, all that stuff. And also,
the prescription obviously is going to be different. I'm more of an advocate of maybe not what would you call free education, but a subsidizing of more trade schools within the United States to allow people to transition from industries easier. That would be my personal prescription.
Yeah, but then even that requires, because I agree, people should be able to have transferable skills and be able to train for different sections. And people are different, right? There's not everyone's going to have the same goal and suitability to certain types of education. So there should be variation and such. But for that to be realized for the average American worker, for instance, especially in, you look at all those cities and towns and sort of the urban decay of places that were industrialized, that lose their industrial jobs and then don't quite have the replacements because the economy is centered elsewhere, or because jobs have gone to the global south and such and have been taken by capitalists to cheaper places. Like, for us to intervene there and to say, yeah, we've got to actually put something in place here, requires a spending of resources, an allocation of resources, which often runs counter to what we see from typical right-wing spending and such.
Well, yes, I would agree that, as I said, I would argue this is among the right and among the left, that there just hasn't been, there's been a push forward to new industries and not enough addressing of the previously abandoned industries. Like, you could argue that the Democratic Party might be addressing it more with trying to implement things like free healthcare, or you're probably an advocate of something like universal basic income or something like that.
That effect.
You have to. There needs to be opportunity for people to transition from one industry to another, but you also can't, at least in my personal opinion, you can't provide too much incentive to just stay in one place. Basically, what you would say is maybe not leeching might be the best word, but through government programs not being encouraged to move from one industry to another. So you need the opportunity, but you shouldn't be. It shouldn't be comfortable just to stay in one spot doing nothing. I guess is the best.
And you're right. I would take some issue with that, but I'm pragmatic. We'll leave that for a second.
Oh yeah.
I think that we can see, though, that there is what would be ideal for part of it is the natural sort of changing landscape, right? Like the way the economy has gone, people aren't going to be needing to put physical labor into tasks that can be done A, with technology, and B, elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
So a program to actually put in place would be needed in some form, wherever it came from, Democrats, Republicans. Any sensible government should think, okay, we've got this big pool of workers who are soon going to be out of work or soon going to be unable to, already unemployed. We've got to do something. Now, the laissez-faire policies that several governments have sort of taken inspiration from, which isn't to say that they followed it perfectly, but certainly has been a guiding principle. And that is Democrat and Republican, by the way. I would say that the Democrats, whilst operating on the left of American society, I think have happily embraced much of the same.
I would argue. Well, they're also in favor of pushing a free capitalist market forward. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. Exactly.
What was I going to say? Yeah. Continue. Yeah. Sorry.
So yeah, I'm saying that because these laissez-faire principles haven't really been strayed from enough, neither party has really, and again, where I stand. Democrats, I would say, are much, much better at this than Republicans because they are not as right-wing, but and certainly not Trump's horrible version. But the focus hasn't been there because the idea of setting up things for people runs counter to making money. If you want to, in society, say we're going to put things in place for people and make even just opportunities, right? Even like a program that says, work hard on this educational program, and then you have a chance to go and be a coder. We'll give you the skills to be able to go and do this. That takes allocating resources, which have to come from somewhere, and inevitably will challenge someone who wants to make a lot of money. Like if you're really wealthy and such, and someone wants to make new programs,
well,
there is an element of have to.
I believe it's a misconception that the tax burden always will come from the rich. Specifically, the tax burden comes from everyone. And I think that needs to be acknowledged, that you can argue to have like this extremely robust, extremely expensive social programs in order to in order to bring people from one trade to the other. But if you spend too much, that ultimately is going to you're going to be taxing everyone. It's never going to be and you'll be ultimately taxing everyone, which will ultimately slow down the economy even more because consumer spending is going to be less. So that needs to be acknowledged, basically. That
like I said, I'm a pragmatist.
Yeah.
I'm parking my more socialist views for a second.
Yeah.
But would you agree, though, that at the moment the current state of wealth inequality is far, far too much, to the way of the sort of corporate side, right?
Because it depends on how you define wealth inequality. Like, there's a difference between obviously like liquid assets and like what we consider to be like real assets. Some of it's like kind of not real. Some of it is kind of real. Like if Elon Musk in theory is the richest man in the world, but if you actually try to liquidate all of his assets, he would probably not be the richest man in the world anymore. He would probably only maybe get like just
no. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
He'd probably get a lot of money.
I completely agree with like there's an element of falseness to how when you see someone he's worth $1 trillion. Like, of course, there's an element of fakeness to it. But at the same time, the material needs of someone. Go ahead, sorry.
It more isn't a matter of wealth inequality. It's more of a matter of people. Well, right now the economy just isn't doing that well, and combination of the economic slowdown plus industries being abandoned means that people are moving towards more radical options in order to fix the world. Or fix America, I guess. So on the left, you will see people like Zohran Mamdani getting elected as sort of the more radical option to fix things. I'm sure you're a big fan. And then on the right, you have people electing Donald Trump as their counter reaction. And they both have their solutions. Zohran wants to implement rent freezes and to use public spending in order to build more affordable housing. And then Donald Trump wants to institute tariffs in order to basically revert America back to a more manufacturing-based economy. I would argue that personally, both of these things are not going to be a solution to fixing America and the American system. But as we see more economic slowdown and less job opportunities, people are going to continue voting more and more radical. So my fear is with the Trump administration inevitably not achieving its economic goals. Either we're going to have a very radical right-wing candidate or a very radical left-wing candidate, and that the center is going to continue being torn apart. That is my greatest fear currently.
I would actually share that analysis. I think that people are being pulled in different directions. I think there is definitely, given the current state of our economy and the sort of challenges facing the world, people definitely are, yes, and certainly, I don't like the word populism as such, but like the far right, far left, and sort of parties that remain in the center probably aren't winning the votes they used to.
I wouldn't necessarily. You could call it far right, far left. You could just call it more radical. So I would argue that it is populist, especially among Donald Trump, and that it's sort of you're either going to have more radical people on the left or more radical people on the right. Using far right and far left sometimes doesn't necessarily work because it's like a political compass thing, and that's sort of like meme at times, and I suppose. I think there's some value to it personally, but again, we'll park it for a second. I want to come back to wealth inequality, because like I was saying a second ago, I agree that when you see some of the numbers next to people's names, a lot of it is like hyperbole. It's not literally as though someone could empty their wallet and $1 trillion falls out, right? But at the same time, said person is able to live a life that is free of the burdens that many people who are living paycheck to paycheck have to put up with. So the people we were speaking about a second ago who are living in areas with economic downturn, without that reliable employment from large manufacturers, they are met with challenges that encompass many of the things which the wealthiest in society, the inordinately wealthy, will never dream of even having to think about. Is their housing stable? Are they able to access healthcare? Can they
reliably put together a well-balanced and nutritious diet from the money they're able to pull together. If they have kids, this compounds. If they are met with a healthcare emergency, this compounds. Even just if your shoes break, can you afford to get a good pair of shoes reliably? There's a very I'm very guilty. I've not read Terry Pratchett to any suitable degree, but there's a very fantastic analogy he makes with the fact that poor people end up spending more money on their footwear than rich people do, because you buy a good pair of shoes that costs a bit more, that's going to last you far longer than buying repeatedly cheap, horrible, tatty trainers that fall apart and you have to keep replacing them and such. So wealth inequality absolutely is something which I think is relevant in terms of when we're met with the market in place of the state in terms of how we manage those resources. And returning to the element of, if you wanted to train people in different, to be ready for when the economy shifts away from physical labor to tech and such, that is inevitably going to be felt differently for people in different sections of society. And that is where a laissez-faire approach would struggle to meet the climate of the society. It very much assumes that everyone has the ability to perform in the market, when unfortunately not everyone does.
Well, the general idea is that if you have a laissez-faire economy, if the economy starts speeding up again, that means there's going to be more job opportunities, meaning that also means that the requirements for getting a job probably going to be lower because there's just more jobs available in the market. I don't think necessarily the state can be the solution to everything, or can necessarily be that state subsidies of certain industries or of individuals, or the nationalization of certain industries in order to benefit the people, necessarily does the greatest amount of good that people think it does. I think we're kind of straying from the anti-Trump conservatism to a more of a left versus right views on sort of economic policies on prosperity. But I think one of the things about the American, I guess the American proposition, is that when you come to this country, you're going to be able to make more money than everywhere else in the world. That's why people from Europe, that's why people from Asia, that's why people from Africa and South America, well, they all come here because we have the best economic opportunities. So ensuring that that there are high-paying jobs available in America, I think that leads to us being number one and us being extremely competitive on the world market. And if we basically tax the hell out of the upper brackets in order to equalize things, I think that will greatly dissuade some of the other competitive edges that we either currently or used to hold.
I agree. It's a hub of capital, right?
Yeah.
But if we want, again, I am leaving my
your sort of more radical positions behind. Yeah.
Exactly right. But if we want that to be maintained, it's sensible to have at the same time some of that capital used by an organizing body to say, actually, we've also got to look out for the little guy, someone who maybe isn't able to relocate across a continent to meet the demands of the new economy. So the person, because let's be realistic as well. There's only so many jobs you'd be able to offer for coding positions in a tech company, right? Not all of those workers at the coal plant are going to be able to, even if they all took initiative and did the course and passed, there's only so many that can get onto the course, right? So the material needs of the other workers also need to be addressed. And that's why we're coming back. So you said we're getting away from the topic a little bit.
Yeah.
But I would argue that we're, I was looping around, right? A big curve.
It all comes around in the end, yeah.
For those workers to be supported, you have to be able to say, okay, even though we have all this economic opportunity, we also need to be thinking about how we're going to look after those of us who aren't going to be able to experience every element of this opportunity, those of us who won't be able to become the next big thing in the market. That challenges the power and the wealth of the wealthiest. Now, that isn't to say that it's impossible. I'm not saying that every single person who is right-wing and wealthy is like some evil, scheming Mussolini who's going to like come and get his firing squad and such to kill the dissidents. But there is an element of economic reaction to when a sort of policy which comes from a more left-wing position, like I've just suggested, is raised, because of course, they're capitalists, right? They want to be as wealthy as possible. Now, some of them are going to also have that social element of, actually, we do need to have people supported so the economy can function, so that I can make my business keep going. And there is an element of inevitable crash, but like you've just said, the economy won't be able to survive under Trump's current plans, because you're killing off the reasons people put wealth and money into the country, as well as...
Well, it's not necessarily that the economy won't survive, but it's more, we're going to be reverting to a, how should I say it, like a smaller economy. It's sort of like a shrinkage. Like the American economy will survive, like even if there's an economic crash like we had in 2008. No matter what, the American economy is still going to survive. But it's more of a matter of how much is it going to shrink, or how much has it already shrunk and just not grown. I don't know if you're familiar with the GDP growth statistics with and without the AI infrastructure. Have you ever seen that before?
I've not seen it.
Basically, if you look at the GDP growth in the United States, excluding the growth of like AI infrastructure, it's like 0.1%, which is terrifying, to be honest, because that means that like 2% of our growth is just investing in the growth of like AI companies. So
not good. But that for us to be able to say, we've got to think about everyone and not just the whims of what the wealthiest want, is, no matter how you phrase it, a challenge to the wealthy. And that is where someone like Trump comes in. Trump is obviously a billionaire, so he's already got that sort of incentive in place. He's also obviously a particularly awful human being, but more importantly for this, he is able to represent elements of the sort of corporate wealthy class and appeal to the nationalistic elements of parts of the country by introducing this radical, populist, fascist element to what was already existing conservative politics, right? You've got the business stuff set up, so it's not hard to say, I'm going to actually advocate for American business and such. You've got the dissatisfaction with the status quo, because Democrats, Republicans, they've had turns in charge, and the signs of decay are still there. If you're living in a place like Detroit and your jobs are all gone, it's not mattered who has been in charge of the structure of the American economy. You're still having a hard time potentially. And so someone who says, we're going to shake things up from the sort of conventional neoliberal globalized way of looking at things. We're going to go to, as you've said, a more protectionist, reduced state, conservative program and such. Like, that is where that comes from. And so what I would posit from that little point about laissez-faire is that there is some reflection, I think, needed for conservatives and such, because it's not as though I would never say, I'm not going to sit here and say, yes, you are the reason MAGA exists. But at the same time, I think the right-wing discourses around state spending and stuff,
the conservative, you're right that there needs to be a reflection among conservatives in the United States over the abandonment of the average worker, and that our current policies might not be the best for ensuring that these people remain prosperous. That there needs to be some sort of policy change. I don't know what that would look like, but I think you are correct that there needs to be some sort of discourse that's happening, because clearly something didn't work, and we're seeing this counter reaction to that not working. So,
and I think as well, because here's where I'll sort of bring some of my left wing stuff back, my socialist stuff. Like, there is that fear of the state spending, right? And conservatives, you would argue, because like, it's not as though the fear is entirely unfounded. The idea that handing control of people's regular lives and such to a central authority will have some. Well, it's going to cause concern to people, right? But I think that is separate almost to the sort of purpose of why a left-wing argument comes in, right? Because the overall sort of left-wing argument is a wider critique of capitalism. But whilst we have a capitalist system, and whilst we have the ability to, as you've said, like economic opportunity, the ability to make money and such, inevitably people with more resources are going to be able to accelerate off into the distance. It's like if you imagine like some go-kart competition, right? Like where everyone's trying to make the best car, trying to make the best vehicle to get around the track. And then someone comes in with like the Shell oil money, and they've got like an F1 car, whilst everyone else is building with go-karts and stuff. Like someone needs to say, well, hang on a minute, we got to address some of this, right? And so the compromise of sorts, the mediation of the problem, is people within state infrastructure putting in programs like welfare, like the education system, right? The idea that everyone should have an education is something which probably was believed for a very long time, but was introduced because someone had to say, yeah, we've got to intervene here, and we've got to have someone in the organization of the state putting in place things and resources to get all the kids educated. And that took time to fight for, right? Like that took workers coming together and academics and actual discussion to say, yeah, we've got to actually have this intervention, otherwise everyone's going to remain illiterate and able to do anything. And so these interventions don't have to be scary; they can be something useful. I think that is
the problem is that they are very, very scary. So
why?
This is what probably differentiates me from the average liberal or the average social democrat, the average socialist, or whatever you want, average person on the left, is that there was a fear within the Republican Party and conservatives in the United States that too much government centralization would lead to some sort of either like dictatorship or pseudo-dictatorship. Now, obviously, it's a bit ironic because now among the Republican Party, we are seeing that centralization happening from where the critique originated from. But that doesn't mean that the original critique was wrong. The centralization of power within the federal government can and will inevitably be abused. We see this with things like the FCC, in which Jimmy Kimmel was pulled off the air because of comments that he made about the death of Charlie Kirk. We see this with ICE being used as basically Trump's private police force. We see this with I'm trying to think of a specific, like the FBI being used to investigate like judges and people on like the J6 committee.
John Bolton, right?
Yes. Having all of this centralization, specifically around the federal government, even more specifically around the executive branch, has led to the ability of people like Donald Trump being very close to establishing a dictatorship. So you might be right in the fact that there might be certain needs for the government to address, like education, for example, or there might need to be some sort of a government healthcare system in order to help people who give healthcare to basically anyone who's out of a job and can't afford it, But the problem that I specifically have is liberals in the United States, and I would assume that you would want this if you were here as well, want to implement that federally. And I don't think it should be implemented federally, because you will inevitably have another Donald Trump. And when another Donald Trump happens, they're going to use that and they're going to abuse that for their own gain. The Department of Education, for example, if our education system was completely centralized within the federal government, because it's not, but if it was, I can't even imagine what the Trump administration will be teaching to the next generation. They'll be teaching about how Democrats are evil and how, Ilhan Omar is a radical Islamist who wants to destroy America. They'll be like teaching that in as part of the state-derived curriculum. Or we're seeing this with the FDA. What the fuck is this? RFK Jr. Abusing the FDA in order to bring in pseudoscientific health bullshit, basically. So you might be right in saying that there are certain government programs that need to be created to help the lower rungs of society, but it cannot be centralized. Or if it is centralized, we should be very, very wary about how much power we give to it, because inevitably, it will be abused. And I don't think you would probably like it if the Trump administration had access to a national healthcare system where they say, well, if you're a Democrat, you're unable to get healthcare. Or
exactly right. I mean,
yeah, or the Trump administration utilizing companies like Palantir in order to like spy on American citizens. It's that criticism of centralization is basically what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, because I agree with what you've said, right? Like, because it is of course a terrible thing that all the things you just listed are happening. The fact that a Trump administration can come in and just take the infrastructure that's in place and turn it on its axis to attack the American people and such. I would say that is why you would have a system which has checks and balances, which has direct democratic controls and the ability to stop itself from independence from the existing party that's in power, right? So like you have a function in place to stop this from spinning over. But things again are...
The problem with the United States specifically is we've put so much power over the executive and what they're able to do, with like employees and reforming the checks and balances, or like just absolutely ignoring it with executive orders, that I would argue that the only real checks and balances is to make it distributed among the states, and it's just not federal at all. I'm assuming you're a pro-choice person, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So I'm assuming that you would disagree with the dissolution of Roe v. Wade within the United States, right?
In the sense that it allows a structure in place that protected abortion as a right. Yeah, of course.
I would argue that Roe v. Wade has done the most to both pro-life and pro-choice people for different administrations. It has done good for the pro-life people under Democratic administrations that basically says, okay, it's up to the individual states to protect pro-life legislation and beliefs. And then under the Trump administration, you could argue that the dissolution of Roe v. Wade has allowed pro-choice states to protect their abortion rights over what the federal government might be doing. I'm wondering what your opinion is on something like that.
So that sort of links into what I was about to say about some of the other stuff. So I'll bring back my socialist hat. We've got to think about what states do and how they are accountable to people. Now, under our current structures, and sort of connected to our historical place as well, we've come from, certainly in the UK, a very long history of kings, rulers, unquestionable power over peasants and such.
Oh yeah, we know. Trust me, we know.
Exactly right. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and defend the horrors of the British Crown and such, right? But because of that, the formation of states is intertwined with this alongside all our human history. And it's only very recently that people have been able to advocate for freedoms for peoples, right? B, been able to say this out loud without getting like hung, drawn, and quartered and killed by the king's men and such. And then C, had the political influence to be able to say, yeah, actually, slavery is terrible. Why are we doing this? We should be educating our kids. All these other sort of social goals and improvements and such. And so when we're talking about, say, a state program which allows anyone, no matter what state you're in, to be able to access healthcare and such, I think that should be viewed differently to how bodies like ICE, the FBI, you said, like FCC and such, operate, which have an element of formation through the infrastructure of the political system. And especially when we consider that the fascists who have taken over these institutions, so ICE, for instance, they have an express, fascism is the use of the state to further the power of the group, right? Like it's a far right movement which builds off the capitalist structures of the economy by turning the infrastructure of the state into a vehicle for capital, turning ICE into this hellish, like grabbing anyone foreign and such, mass deregulation, the seizing of federal land, all the other horrible stuff. Trump's blatant use of government to further his own interests, like all the tools, all the hallmarks of, like you said, right on the cusp of dictatorship. And this happens in states, not because the state has been given like central power and such. This comes through a reaction to economy, a reaction to being met with the element. Like obviously it's a mix of factors, right? But the economic elements.
The problem is that you can never guarantee that that conditions will always stay the same. I would argue that it is inevitable that someone will try to come in and they will try to use and abuse the system in order for their own personal gain.
That's why the factors that prompt this have to be addressed, and that's why when we're talking about checks and balances, what we have currently clearly hasn't been enough, right? Because here is Trump having literally tried to overthrow an election last time, back in office, and doing all the other stuff, doing the stuff he was doing last time, but a million times worse, right? Clearly, the checks and balances weren't enough.
Well, arguably, January 6th was the greatest test of checks and balances, and that they did work in a way that Mike Pence, my personal hero, Mike Pence, defended America basically there. He single-handedly saved the United States.
I wouldn't say I'm a big fan of his, but yeah, on that day, some good choices were made. And here's where Democrats need to hold their hands up and say, senior Democrats need to say, well, what was going on? Because a functioning society and country says, Trump off to prison with you, like Jair Bolsonaro had in Brazil. But no, they squandered it. And I'm not going to sit here and say it's entirely just them, because obviously there's an element of like corruption and what's it called, tomfoolery and such in the American structures. But the fact that they didn't put in a proper place to, put Trump, certainly stop him running again properly, but the lack of seriousness with which they treated the obvious sort of fascist threat that Trump was going for is a big thing.
I would argue that the Democrats took the worst road imaginable when it came to addressing Trump.
Like it wasn't. Oh, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I'm not liberal. I'm not going to sit here and defend Joe Biden and such. They dropped the ball entirely. But part of that is because of the way the American structural sort of foundations is organized. Like the fact that there's an overwhelming concern with the supposed I say rights of the individual, but it's not genuine rights. It's like you said, economic opportunity, freedom to act as a free person unto capital and such, right? Some of that infects how you think about a lot of topics, which prevents you doing what is just and right. And that, I think, is an overarching theme of why I would tie all the sort of stuff we've spoken about so far back into Trump, because moving away from some of the ideas that Trump is so keen to advocate for will inevitably intersect with how we view things like the state acting as a intermediary and such. Like abortion, obviously I'm pro-choice, right? And I think that everyone, in my view, like if you don't want to get an abortion, don't get one. And if you want to get one, get one. In my mind, like this fair. And sure, people have their reasons for disagreeing, but ultimately, I think that it's your body, your choice and such. But the reason, because you're talking about how like states that have the power to say, we're going to keep abortion are protecting it from Trump's decision to try and curb it and such. But the point is that it shouldn't have to be like that, because in a genuinely, and again, I'll bring in some of my socialist stuff, in a genuinely democratic society, you wouldn't have competing factors able to leverage different laws and random parts of the infrastructure of the country and such. You'd have a society in which people genuinely had a voice in the politicians. Elected officials weren't like I don't know, like a career option where you use it to gain favor with various lobby groups and then with a nice position on a board of some company at the end of it. Like, it would be a genuinely representative role in which you, as a member of your community, have gone to speak to the needs of what you have, right? And so, because
you're arguing
people
I'm assuming you're arguing for some more democratization of the American legislative and executive functions, sort of like the ability to recall the president if they're doing all this BS. Is that what you're sort of getting at, or
that's things in that direction? Yeah, I mean, long term, obviously, much more than just that. But certainly, the idea that the way the American democratic system functions is at all even accessible for the average person, let alone representative and democratic, I think is nowhere close. So
why would you argue that? Just out of curiosity, like what specific criticisms do you have of the current American democratic system that you would say that the average individual cannot like participate in democracy, I guess, or have very little recourse in the participation of democracy? Because I'm not familiar with British the British democratic system that much, but I think there's a lot of similarities between how we run our things and how you run your things as well. So
trust me, I'm very critical of Britain's democracy as well. I mean, for one, first past the post voting is abysmal. Like, it is a shocking voting system. There's a reason it's us, you guys in America, and like, I think that's it. Actually, I think it's just us two. I think we only two. Everyone else has gone to PR or some kind, and we can see that people are largely despising of Trump's Republican Party. People, obviously, he's got MAGA and such, but approval's not good, and most people didn't vote for him. Democrats, they're also not favored very well. I know they just won. There's definitely people who are more liked in the party, and I would say on the whole, typically, really more of their policies are supported more, if that makes sense. But on the whole, I'd say no, people aren't like, yes, I'm a proud Democrat. The more people are like, what have you been doing, guys? It's always awful, Biden.
And
these are the only two
dropped the ball on a lot of things.
Exactly, right? But these are the only two parties that have held office for over centuries. Literally, you have to go back to the 19th century to find a non-Democrat or Republican president. And in the UK, you have to go, the Labour and Conservative parties have been the dominant two. And I know, obviously, at the moment, we've got a whole separate conversation about the current state of things.
What is it called? UK First or something like that? Or Reform UK?
Reform UK.
Yeah, I think they're the ones that are polling pretty well right now.
Yeah, they've got and even then, like, the fact that they have like 30 to 35% of the whole polling support, it could win could win a majority of the seats in Parliament, and then all of the voting power then to be able to pass laws and such in the House. Like, things like that demonstrate the disconnect between what voters vote for and what voters get. And then even that is an assumption, right? Because you're only voting for in America, for instance, president, for your representatives at the House and such, maybe some local elections.
You local elections with like judges and like mayors, and you have your local representative, and then you have your congressman, your senator as well, and then your the governor of your state, and then the president every 4 years, along with the VP, I guess, who's the running. So there is a lot to elect for. I mean.
But when you think about how many issues there are, like, that a person is interacting with, so environment, so in their own lives, like food, housing, education, the local area, like what is in the place you live in, how resources are managed, the environment and such, and then all of that is filtered into elections in which the candidates who run often don't have the interest in what is there, because they're part of a larger party infrastructure. And they've been told, like with the MAGA, for instance, and the Republicans, right? Someone like yourself, right? You are a Republican, but your voice isn't represented in the main.
Actually, that's a funny thing. Are you familiar with Thomas Massey at all? You ever heard that name?
Oh yeah, he's one of the. Is he a senator?
He's in the House of Representatives. Thomas Massey is my local representative who I voted for.
Exactly.
So I would argue that my voice is technically representative, being more critical of the current Republican Party, because he's like the major Republican right now who's going against Trump, and who I've personally voted for. So I guess you could argue that some people might be unrepresented when it comes to the representative, but that's just how democracy is that whoever your representative who gets the majority of votes is going to be the one that wins, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I would disagree very slightly, because I think that, I mean, I'm very glad that you've got someone who you think speaks your beliefs.
I'm more lucky than most. I'm sure a lot of people would like Thomas Massey to be there.
But exactly, like, he is someone who, and again, you know, obviously I'm not a Republican. I don't really agree with like right-wing politics and such, but
yeah,
he is someone that is there largely bucking the trend of in fact, he is so prominent as someone who speaks out against the stuff Trump does, is because there's not many who do in the sort of Republican Party at the moment. And that isn't even necessarily to say that like MAGA is, I mean, obviously MAGA is the theme of the party in a lot of ways at the moment, but that is a sort of reflection of the fact that the democratic process isn't really represented because of the way money and power operates in politics in general. Like, it's hard to have a voice when you are competing with factions which have disproportionately large wallets. You know, if you're like, for instance, many of the things Trump has done have been wildly unpopular, yet because of the inordinate power he has in the party, the wealth he's able to spend, the ridiculous focus on many things, the dissident voices get drowned out quite a bit by that overarching power. And then on a
my counter argument to that is going to be your personal hero, Zohran Mamdani, who won the New York race in spite of, I guess, what you would say is the big wallets of the counterparties. What would be your reaction to that?
Okay, so I mean, obviously, personal hero is a stretch, but obviously, I'm very pleased that someone.
Well, sorry, I'm being hyperbolic for the sake of the stream.
No, of course. But I think that he is a good example because he's massively had to buck the trend and fight against the odds. Yeah, you look at the wealth of of Cuomo, of Adams. You look at the amount of money spent on their campaigns. Mamdani had to massively organize on the grassroots level, and it helps that I think New York, obviously, the things he was speaking to are quite big themes. You know, the cost of living is obscene in a place like New York. Rent, cost of transport, the fact that the previous mayor was like stashing the budgets of libraries and like handing over resources.
But doesn't that almost deride against the idea that you were talking about, that is the American individual cannot be represented with their local representatives because of the big money interests and all that?
I don't think it contradicts it. I think it shows that it's possible, but that it requires a massive amount of several factors. The fact that Mamdani was markedly more left wing than many the previous Democrats. The fact that he's also quite a good communicator. I think there's been plenty of people who've said the same things as him, but because they maybe aren't quite as savvy with the media, get represented as like you just said about Ilhan Omar, who's like, I mean, she's fantastic as well, right? And she's done a great job with her constituency, but faces lots and lots of criticism for bad faith criticism because of the fact that she's portrayed as some like.
I agree that there is a lot of
and worse and
probably unnecessary criticism of Ilhan Omar. Obviously, our politics disagrees probably quite a lot.
Yeah, but the reason I think that I would say there's even Mamdani, right? Like New Yorkers have voted for him, and he will go into office, but he is in a system of systems. He has to negotiate with Trump, who basically is racist about him and wants him arrested and such. He's got to go through various infrastructures of the Democrat Party, which is still quite, I would say, neoliberal and not at all of the same political background of Mamdani, who is a democratic socialist and such. Like, you've got elements that he will have to mediate for. I'm not saying it's impossible.
But he won, though. Like, he won. Like, excuse me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure the Democratic primary for the New York mayoral race was just a majority vote, which he won overwhelmingly.
Yeah, cool.
And then Andrew Cuomo decided to run against him, along with Siwa and Eric Adams. I think Eric Adams dropped out after a little while. I don't know. It just feels like all you claim that these are all like undemocratic things, but I would argue that they are very democratic things. I mean, he won in a Democratic popular vote in order to win the Democratic primaries, and then he won overwhelmingly in the New York mayoral race. I mean, I just don't see specifically what were the hurdles exactly. I can't visualize the specific hurdles that you're talking about. I mean, yeah, he had people, I guess, spending money campaigning against him, and you maybe can argue that it was harder to do grassroots campaigning, but he did do it, and he did win overwhelmingly. Yeah. And I don't think he specifically had any sort of. I don't think Zohran is very rich in his personal life. I don't think he was drawing from some sort of billionaire personal wealth fund. You know, I don't. It just seems very. Your description and the reality seem just a little bit off, at least to me.
Okay. He firstly, I think that the fact that he won is a testament to the fact that he spoke to what a lot of people are thinking. Like, the reason it's tricky for a lot of people to have their voice heard is because a lot of politicians don't say what Mamdani was saying. They either speak in a way which is, I mean, we all sort of joke about politicians lying and such, but like speak through the filter of like American, media training.
And I am American first.
yeah, exactly, right? Like just obvious slogans and buzzwords and sort of stuff which sounds ridiculous when you're outside of like the I don't know, political focus group with like your friends and such. He spoke in a way which was just transparent and honest, and most importantly, directly concerned with the improvements to the quality of life of people in New York. On a range of issues too. Like I don't know about you, but I'm a big sports fan. Are you into your sport?
No, not a big sports fan. I grew up in Alaska myself, so it's not like I can have any domestic sports teams to really root for.
Ice hockey? Do you know ice hockey in Alaska?
I did it when I was like 10 years old, but nah.
Okay, but like to sort of get off my anecdote, one of the first things I actually saw of Mamdani, because I'd heard of him, and I'd sort of from friends and such, be like they'd saying, "Oh yeah, he's looking really good and promising and such," and I thought, yeah, that sounds cool. But what really made me think about him, and it's probably a little bit silly, was I'm a massive football fan. You would call it soccer, probably, but obviously the World Cup is in America next year, but the prices are so high. Like the cost of tickets are like thousands. So like unless you are loaded, you're never probably gonna be able to get to a game. And he did a little video about it. He's just kicking the ball around and he's talking about the facts of the issue and such. And it's only small, but it directly concerns what someone might think in New York. He spoke about the fact that because there's no regulation really for how businesses have been, how they're able to sell tickets and such football matches, you can just flog it to whatever price you like for fans, and they're basically going to have to pay. I.e., if you're not really wealthy, you're spending an arm and a leg to get to the game and such, which obviously is not great if you want to go and see World Cup as you probably goes to your country once in your lifetime. But this, to bring it back to the central point, this for Mamdani bucked the trend because obviously he faced so many attacks from people in Democrat mainstream party, the wider right-wing media and such, and people even in New York, like Cuomo, who basically said quite a few disgusting things about him. And these factors don't make it impossible, but mediate the chance of your democratic wishes for someone like Mamdani being able to get to the election and being able to take the Democratic primary and being able to win. And even though he has won, I'm not saying that, I'm not a pessimist. I like to be optimistic. I think there's a real chance for him to do some good things. But the barriers that are there for him, for people who are of a more left-wing persuasion, for people who want to directly tackle the concerns of what their voters have said and address things like the cost of living crisis, the cost of food, healthcare and such, is trickier because it challenges the existing structures of, as we were saying earlier, the sort of laissez-faire economy and business first attitudes which have shaped much of the country.
This is very interesting and also a little bit eerie.
Eerie?
I wouldn't say so. The rhetoric that you're talking about of challenging the entrenched governmental powers, of it's a good messaging with like grassroots support, and there is a media opposition funded by some sort of large, donor class, I guess. That is the exact populist argument made by MAGA and Donald Trump. I don't know if you realize that. This is what they argue, that there is a left-wing media establishment, and they're fighting against the deep state, who are trying to implement a liberal leftist agenda against the conservative Donald Trump. It's almost eerie how similar the rhetoric is with like one side and the other. I don't know if you realize that or not.
I mean, I feel like it misses the point a little bit though, because like, of course, if you are going to criticize something that exists, of course, criticism may sound similar, but one is a bad faith criticism. So Trump's criticism isn't because he wants to genuinely change how the structures of the country are run. His criticism is to garner support with people that he's inevitably going to exploit and mistreat, as we're sort of seeing at the moment.
Well, how do you know if it's good faith or bad faith without knowing what their actions are? Like if we just took the campaigning, I guess, on its head without looking at any sort of like results between the two, it's the exact same rhetoric. Like between the two, like you could acknowledge that, right?
I wouldn't quite say it is, because Mamdani's genuinely spoke to the actual needs of what people wanted, whereas Trump's gestured to this whilst focusing on nebulous.
You could argue that Trump genuinely believes that that tariffs are going to help the average American worker. That he's probably as deranged enough that he believes in that. Like. You could argue that it's wrong, and I would argue that it's wrong, but specifically arguing that, like, well, is he just doing it just because he doesn't believe in it and he's will turn it on a dime? Like, I would argue if he really didn't believe in it, that he would have probably abandoned it a while ago, because it's obviously shown not to be very prosperous for the American economy. But he stuck to it in spite of that. So
always. Yeah, but I think the social context is always important, and that sort of can't really because
So what's the different social context between I wouldn't call? Would you call Zohran a populist? I guess, or the populist rhetoric of Zohran of sort of being the grassroots? No, I meant like the people going against some sort of elite, I guess, of let's say of the left with Zohran and of the right in Donald Trump. What differentiates the two besides some sort of nebulous idea of one being good faith and one being bad faith?
The only elite Trump was going after were if you believe that Paul Ryan is elite in the sense that he has a lot of influence in the GOP. He was only interested in dislodging the sort of neoliberal brand of Republican politics that were dominating the scene at the time. He very much is elite because he's a billionaire with clear economic interests, which have been reflected in the policies, quite literally in the footage of him having a great time at Mar-a-Lago, right? Where you got all the dancers and stuff.
The elite doesn't necessarily have to be any sort of economic elite. It can also be a political elite. Like you were talking about before, that there is some sort of entrenched New York politicians or system that might be working against Zohran Mamdani that might prevent him from implementing his socialist policies. And in the same way that Trump would argue that there's some sort of entrenched liberal or leftist institutions that will fight against his glorious populist changes within the federal government. So an elite doesn't have to be economic. It can also be a political elite as well. This is represented in the idea of the deep state within the Republican Party, and then I say within the Democratic Party, it's represented with the idea of there being some sort of, I guess, cronyism, I guess, would be the best way to, among the Republicans.
Yeah, but one of his arguments has some substance to it, and the other one is crap and bad. Like, for as much as...
well, you could argue that one's more legitimate than other, but I think it is a legitimate concern saying that you don't want some sort of untouchable political elites being able to resist, or maybe it is a good thing to have some sort of institutional resistance because that might prevent further centralization. Maybe I have to look into that.
Well, because I mean, if you just think
so you would argue that. Would you argue that it's a good thing or a bad thing that there's some sort of political entrenchment preventing Zohran Mamdani from implementing his policies?
Well, bad, of course. But
okay, so if it's bad, of course, then it's bad for some sort of political entrenchment to prevent Donald Trump from implementing his policies. Then,
right. The difference is that so when Mamdani is speaking about the fact that things haven't changed in Europe for quite some time, right, and he's criticizing the structures of power in the Democrat Party and the wider management and such. He's doing this because he's representing the direct needs of people in New York. So when the previous mayor was cutting the budget of libraries and stuff, that has a major impact on people who need to use the library, for not even just learning, but like as a place to take your kids when it's not school, as a place of safety and warmth and food and such. And because there's lots of things that libraries do for communities which are beyond the obvious purpose of taking a book out and reading it and such. When Trump, that's why he's criticizing the fact that it's been hard to actually get these things advocated for in parts of the Democrat Party because of the amount of money that goes into lobbying for pro-business, and then through that not putting funding into austerity programs which cut these important policies and such. The difference with Trump is that when he's saying, I'm going to fight for the American worker and I'm going to do X, Y, Z, it should clearly be seen as a bad faith argument because something that is not helpful. It doesn't feel
like you're just saying X is bad because it's bad and Y is good because it's good. Like I'm talking about like the rhetoric of Trump doesn't say we're going to do this because it'll hurt the American worker. Trump doesn't say those words correctly. Trump will say we're going to help the American worker by bringing back your jobs through tariffs. So.
Then this is just a question about language, isn't it?
Well, it is. The specific the specific policies don't really matter. I'm more concerned about the sort of populist rhetoric that is implemented between the two, because if I don't think you can really criticize the populist rhetoric of one side if you use it for yourself and your own policies. Does that sort of make sense? I
would reject the idea that Mamdani has used anything close to the same rhetoric that Trump has used. I would say that there's an integrity to...
Well, you're just talking about how there's some sort of political elites preventing him from implementing his policies, and there's some sort of entrenchment within the New York government that will prevent him from being able to implement what he wants to implement, and that there's sort of these elites that are preventing him from, doing all this. That's the exact same rhetoric that Donald Trump is using. I mean, you understand that, right?
Okay, but firstly, the context of these two things. Secondly, I think that we can definitely see that the things which Mamdani has advocated for have been stopped by people in the Democrat Party. I mean, look at where the Democrats were in 2021 when they had taken presidency again and such, and had the 3 houses of government. and the things that were on the cards at the start of the Biden administration, and then what passed. Now, a lot of things that they did were good and went towards it, but a lot of it didn't happen whatsoever. I think, you just knocked your desk.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I accidentally moved my desk a little bit.
That happens to the best of us. I think it's definitely, someone in the chat mentions people like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and stuff. The top end of the party, which receives the money from corporations and such, again, not saying they're like evil and they hate the American people or whatever, but the crying out demand and support and want for the cost of living crisis to be addressed, the fact that there are serious inequalities and injustices across the American system, weren't met anywhere close to the degree they were needed to. The fact that the cost of living is the cost you need to be able to get by in America is well above what minimum wage is, and yet there's been no increase since 2000 and whenever.
I would argue that the cost. Well, it depends on where you live, technically speaking.
Of course,
I don't think that's the argument specifically against the federal minimum wage, is because living in a place like the cost of living in a place like New York, which I believe does not institute the federal minimum wage, is much different than a place like Kentucky, for example.
Of course, but we can agree that it's people are having a hard time, right? Cost of food's going up, rent's going up.
Well, cost of food and rent is going up, but I would argue that's due to the protectionist policies that are implemented by the Trump administration. I mean, that if you were to get rid of the tariffs and you were to try to bring down trade barriers, that the average quality of life and cost of living will go down and the quality of life will go up. I think that's just an absolute fact.
It would have an impact. I think you're quite right in that if Trump's policies were reversed, there would definitely be some improvements. But
I don't think it would have an impact. I think it would be more than just an impact. I think it would be an overwhelming change. At least
it wouldn't fix the issue though. It's not as though before Trump things were rosy and perfect and happy, right?
I think it was probably a lot better than what it was than the start of the current Trump administration.
I agree.
And I think we're I will give Biden credit that domestically speaking, his economy was leading towards like a better direction. Can we also agree on that?
I agree.
So what's exactly the issue here? I mean,
but it was surely you can see that the fact it was better under Biden than Trump and under Obama than Trump doesn't make everyone's living conditions good and rosy and happy. In those systems and before that as well. That is what someone like Mamdani is saying. He's saying, there's been barriers to doing the necessary steps beyond what we've seen under previous Democrat administrations, because when we try and get people together and say, we've got to address our material needs, there is resistance to that from elements of the Democrat Party. Now, that has some similarity with the words which are used by people in the MAGA section. But how those words are used is different. The meaning of those words is different. And the consequence of those actions being executed is different. Because Trump does not care about the things he's saying. He wants power. He says what he does because he believes it will win him power. I think that is...
Well, okay, would you argue that Zohran Mamdani has tempered his rhetoric intentionally in order to gain more political favor?
Yes, there was an element of that, which again.
What do you? Okay, hold on. Okay, do you think it's more than an element? Would you agree? Like, probably to a considerable degree, Zohran has probably tempered his own personal views on certain economic positions and certain world affairs in order to be elected. Like,
yeah, probably.
Okay,
which
so
you have to do in this system.
So, Donald Trump, having different rhetoric of what he espouses versus what he does when he goes into office. Differentiate that in order to basically gain political power and achieve their own true political process. What's the difference between the authenticity of Donald Trump and Zohran Mamdani when they're both changing their rhetoric just for the sake of gaining political power?
Okay, so when Mamdani has in the past said things about, say, socialism or capitalism, these are words with very heavily loaded connotations in American society. I mean, the Red Scare happened in your country, right? You have the literal removal of people deemed to be sympathetic to non-capitalist systems, i.e. anyone who was to the left of McCarthy or whatever in the 50s and such. This is different to Trump saying similar and then saying things in the build-up to his election and then doing differently, because for one, Trump has always served the interest of his own wealth. We've seen this through his time pre sort of being an active Republican candidate for president, and during it, where he's actively used, gutted regulations and such to be able to enrich himself and his allies. Secondly, I think that it's quite different to mediate a policy, to maybe not even mediating a policy, make a policy to have a nicer sounding quality, which is still going to act on the same principles you stand by. So in Mamdani's case, trying to improve the material conditions of the average New Yorker, versus Trump, who was saying anything basically to win favor with various people in society, different things in different places as well, and then acting in a manner which, as we've seen, has largely trashed large parts of the American economy and trashed the lives of the average American worker.
So ultimately, so do you not care about the rhetoric then, just as long as it's honest? I guess is that what would?
No, of course. What you say, things people say should be held up to account and such.
Well, what I mean is if Donald Trump were to use his specifically the rhetorical tactics of Donald Trump, saying we're going to fix America by implementing this, and this, and we're going to go after the elites, and I fight for the average American worker and all that. That doesn't necessarily matter. It's more of the the authenticity behind it, I guess.
Well, I think yes and no. I think there is an element of I think the difference is clearly when Mamdani is saying, I don't even think Mamdani said we're going to fight the elites in the same way Trump did, but when he says it, he's not talking about this in putting people in prison or having the house ransacked by FBI agents who set them and such, or the sort of euphemistic, we're going to loot the deep state to get rid of the enemies within and such. I think there's a massive difference there. And that's sort of one of the key points here, right? One is a fascist, Trump, who, as well as obviously his lack of interest in democracy and proper organization and such, is also conducting racism, sexism, anti-LGBT, anti-disabled, all of those things. Versus Mamdani, who, when he's talking about criticizing power structures, is talking about things which are actively preventing, pressing issues being addressed. I think that anyone can linguistically look at a transcript and say, yeah, there's elements of similar things being said here. But firstly, I think we've got to think why
there are certain things preventing me from what do you say? There are certain things preventing Zohran Mamdani from doing what needs to be addressed, is the exact same rhetoric Trump uses to bypass the courts in order to deport people from the United States without due process.
Okay, but Mamdani's never said oh yeah, we got to just fire the judge because they're Mexican.
But you understand that rhetoric of that rhetoric is dangerous, right? We need to bypass the current system in order to implement the real policies that we need to you understand that can be very dangerous rhetoric, and we should be very wary when people implement things like that.
Firstly, I don't think Mamdani has quite said that element of it. Secondly, though, it's dangerous for people to live under the conditions that were seen from the administrations that Mamdani has criticized. The real consequences of what was going on in New York was that people were unable to put food on their plate. People were getting evicted from their homes. People couldn't access their material needs. That is the danger. And so if Mamdani has said something like, yeah, this system isn't working, we've got to do things to reconstruct it and such, that is entirely different and justified to Trump saying, the judge has said that what I've done is unconstitutional, so I'm going to just ignore them, and we're also going to put their address somewhere for MAGA fans to go and harass and such, right? I think that I think to some extent you sort of know it as well. Like, we're both sitting here critical of Trump because of the things he says,
Yes.
and that is what makes it fundamentally different to what Mamdani does, which, yes, of course, is going to play on the same themes of criticizing what has come before, but can't be removed from the social context which it's taken place in. I think that's so critical.
It's
like,
just it just makes me very, very scary about basically this is a general trend that I've seen specifically among the Democratic Party and certain content creators who are Democrats, that I feel like they almost want to create like a MAGA movement, or like take the fanatical parts of the Republican Party and bring it to the Democratic Party, as well as some of the tactics that they use, like bypassing the Constitution or bypassing democratic systems just for the sake of like winning political power. This is sort of a thing that I kind of wanted to talk about. Of should real Republicans or never Trump Republicans or whatever you want to call us, should we work with Democrats for the sake of preserving the U.S. Constitution? And my specific answer to that is we should only work with Democrats if they're willing to preserve the Constitution. But if they're wanting to be exactly like Trump, but just to implement their own policies, sort of the ends justify the means sort of thing, then I don't know if I necessarily can support them with their project, I guess. Is the best
That's very interesting. I mean, I think I think there's I've seen a few Democrats that'll say, yeah, we need our own MAGA. And I think that they're sort of, what they're saying is we need a movement that captures people in the same way that people have been flocking to Trump, because Trump, for all intents and purposes, has led a very successful movement in the sense that they haven't been able to rally up a previously quite uninterested group of people, take over a political party of the stature of the GOP, which is one of the most successful in the world, right? It's won quite a lot of elections, and now has MAGA-orientated people in senior positions across the entire country, including Supreme Court, Congress, and obviously
technically the Supreme Court is
right?
technically it's a nonpartisan. I mean, you have appointees by certain administrations. You could argue that there's conservative or not conservative. I think there's a misrepresentation about the Supreme Court where they think that there's there are certain justices that will only do the bidding of certain parties, but it's more of the philosophies of different appointees are definitely a lot different. Like whether I feel like there's certain Supreme Court justices who feel as if not necessarily following the Constitution, but instead they want to do what is considered right and healthy. But the issue is that the Supreme Court isn't designed to do what is right. It's just designed to follow the Constitution, even if that is unhealthy for a democracy or unhealthy for America. And that if you want to institute some sort of better change in our democratic systems, they can't just be through meddling with the Supreme Court. It needs to be through the amendment process of getting a 2/3 majority and ratifying it through the states and getting that amendment
I think
implemented through. And that's another thing that I'm concerned about with the Democratic Party is there's a lot of talk about, well, when we get into power, we're just going to pack the court with people who will just say yes to whatever we do and try to just get as much as we can done in like a single administration.
I mean, I think that. So what was the last thing you said? I jumped into it.
That the Democratic Party, I'm very wary of a Democratic Party that might try to pack the Supreme Court with just yes men who don't care about the Constitution. All they want to do is just get their policy passed no matter what. That's one of the things I'm concerned about.
Okay. I mean, just on that point, might you argue that is, slightly a hyperbole, I would say, but also a reaction to what, firstly, Trump has done, and the fact that there's people like...
Well, the Trump administration hasn't packed the Supreme Court. You could argue that they stole, I put that in very heavy quotations there, a Supreme Court pick from either he stole one or he stole two from Biden or Obama or something like that. But even then, Trump hasn't said, all right, we're going to pack the Supreme Court in order to make sure that we only get yes men. And you could argue that the Supreme Court might be more leaning towards what the Trump administration does, but I would argue that's because the Constitution has given so much power to the executive that the Supreme Court can't regulate what Trump does, because it's like the Supreme Court doesn't have the authority to do things like recall federal troops, for example. That is within the sole purview of the President of the United States. So when
Commander in Chief, right?
Yeah. So it's interesting, that sort of situation.
But like this, I do want to come on to what you were saying about sort of Democrats and MAGA and left MAGA or whatever. But just on the court for a moment, I think this does speak to what we were saying about the lack of like connection from the average person to the structures of democracy and of the law and such. Because one, the fact that there are 9 justices,
yes,
lifetime appointments.
Yeah, well, that's intentionally by design, and arguably, I would say that the lifetime appointments probably has done the most harm. Because imagine this: imagine an administration in which Trump is elected with the majority vote, and he's able to basically swap out as many justices as he wants when he comes to power. I mean, that would just further entrench his power, because you could argue that maybe it's less democratic, but it certainly has prevented a popular vote president who's moving further towards authoritarianism to prevent. I
mean, that is one
that from like happening,
Yeah, I mean that's one interpretation, but another might be you have a situation where like several judges have been appointed by one obviously corrupt president and have themselves been corrupt. So, I mean, Clarence Thomas flying off to various.
Well, yeah, Clarence Thomas definitely is an issue, but I think that's an issue for impeachment of the Supreme Court justice, and not necessarily packing the Supreme Court with yes men just because they don't suit your political interests. Like the reason why we have lifetime appointments for our Supreme Court justices is to exclude them from the democratic process. To not necessarily because it is democratic, but it's to prevent partisanism to come to our Supreme Court, which is supposed to be above these political issues.
Yeah, but it hasn't though, because of exactly like I'm not going to sit here and be like, yeah, it's I understand why they're in place, right? I understand that they have tried to give it that non-partisan status and such, and try to have it something, as you said, right, following the Constitution, but it hasn't, because in many ways it has been engineered by the political system to be a case of, well, when we have the opening, we're going to put our person in, and then in reaction to Trump's activities,
well, that's completely by luck.
But
I mean,
but then that's not a good system, then, is it? Like,
no, what do you think? There should be term limits in which we elect a Supreme Court justice or anything like that every 4 years. You change it out so that there's even more like party entrenchment or more party power whenever they win. Like I'm just imagining how much more power MAGA would have if they were able to, or how much more power Trump would have if he was able to pick his own even more Supreme Court justices for specifically just his term. I mean, I'm just like the amount. Like, imagine a Supreme Court that would have no recourse against the Trump administration. That would have no like going against what he does. Where people like Abrego Garcia will always. The Supreme Court says, well, yeah, it's okay for Abrego Garcia to be sent to an El Salvadorian prison, or a Supreme Court that says, yes, it's okay for Donald Trump to institute tariffs because he's, the president of the United States, and he's obviously the dictator, and he deserves to be called the best, and he has a massive penis. It's like the partisan. You argue that it is already partisan, but your solution would only give Trump more power.
My solution, I mean, firstly, I'm not suggesting that it's like every 4 years we must vote this person off, and it's got to be. I'm not suggesting it's going to be exactly the same as an election, like for a president. What we're saying is, firstly, in tandem with other things, like I'm also not suggesting you would only change the court and not everything else in American politics. But more even the process of becoming a justice, I
Mhm.
think, is so heavily mediated through who has access to the institutions and the years of training and the cost that all has to be able to
Well,
become
arguably,
the
you would
justice
want that
in
to
the
be a
first
good
place.
thing because you want competent justices. I mean, in theory, you could appoint
Yeah, but
anyone.
wouldn't
You could appoint anyone you want to become a Supreme Court justice. I don't think there is
you've
actually
jumped the
any.
gun then, North, because I
Oh,
wasn't saying
oh,
just
oh,
hire
okay.
anyone.
Yeah,
I was
sorry.
saying like I'm not saying it's like lucky dip, like right, Bob, you're the new justice. I'm saying the actual process for someone to become a Supreme Court justice and even just a judge, right, is mediated through factors of wealth, education, home background, and such, which prevents large parts of American democracy from American populace actually accessing that pathway, which then leads to people like I keep going back to Clarence Thomas, but there's others on there, right, who are more easily swayed by because like someone in the chat I think says that conservative judges aren't necessarily the issue, and my inner socialist of course is twinging, but on paper, yeah, a conservative judge could still say, yeah, even though I am conservative, here are the laws we have set out. Here are things which are following the Constitution, and we can say that, say, Trump's action is not one which follows the laws of the land. Trump has done something wrong here. But that doesn't happen because the sort of person which is more likely to be selected by a president, and certainly who's in the circle to begin with, is someone who is influenced by the same pursuit of capital and power and such, and literally like paid off in some cases to reach that position.
The problem is that yes, there is like Clarence Thomas obviously being the most notorious issue of a corrupt Supreme Court judge, but the problem is that this has been the exception and not the norm, and that I think the Supreme Court justices are actually they're paid quite well, and I don't know exactly off the top of my head if there's some sort of like a disenfranchisement sort of thing where like if you're a Supreme Court judge you can't hold like stock in industries you're about to like make a Supreme Court ruling on, but I don't think that there's a very strong relation between like the control of capital and being a Supreme Court justice. And I mean, you mentioned before, like there are certain wealth and like background and educational requirements in order to be a Supreme Court justice or being a judge in general, and that might exclude certain populations of America. But I would counter that by saying you wouldn't want a judge who has like an extensive criminal background or anything like that to be implemented there. And I don't think maybe you could argue that like I've said what I need to say. Is there anything you would disagree with what I just said there?
Just on so when I was saying about the people who have access to becoming a judge, what I'm saying is if you are as a child and as you grow through into adulthood and such, if you are able to access the educational tools and can have the connections and such to be able to get the place at the university, so you call it college, right? The training, the funding that you actually need to have to be able to.
Hold on. Hello? Is my microphone working or is... Hold on. I can't hear you. You're not picking up on my desktop audio either. I think it's on your end.
We know.
Okay, yeah, I can hear you now. Okay, yes.
Okay, awesome. I'll get back to what I was saying. So the pathway to becoming a judge is one that requires significant amounts of educational investment.
Yes.
Time spent.
You're muted again. I don't know what's going on here.
You know.
Okay, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Right, brilliant. Sorry, my microphone appears to have died.
Oh, is it like a Bluetooth microphone or something like that?
No, it's literally the cheapest one.
Oh. Gotta get a Blue Yeti. That's what you gotta do. That's what I'm rocking right now.
Blue Yeti. I'll write that down somewhere. Thank you. Right. Hopefully this
Actually,
is
maybe
okay
don't get a
for
Blue
moment.
Yeti because apparently this has been a bad investment. There's like different types of
Really?
microphones. There's like one that gathers like all the sound in a room. I forget what it's like, dynamic versus something else. The Blue Yeti apparently is not the one you want for the good streamer mic quality. You want the one that it basically is like a cone shape with the microphone, so it only gets your voice and not everywhere around you. So
Yeah. You learn something new every day.
audio issues have been an issue for me.
What was I saying? Okay. So Supreme Court justices.
Yes.
And then I will get back onto left-wing MAGA because I did want to say about what you were saying.
Mm.
Anyway, Supreme Court justices. To become a Supreme Court justice takes a significant amount of investment, time, education, access to resources, all of those things. People who can access that in society are disproportionately wealthier because the way the system is set up does not make it easy for those with less resources, the people who are, say, in the Rust Belt or in the urban city centre and such, to access them. And that means that the issues which are being represented are from a perspective of people with a greater relation to capital. And on top of that, because of the way that society is structured, because of the fact that we are so heavily invested in like a make as much money as you can like attitude, it's easier for someone to be persuaded by the more nebulous elements of democracy. Now, I'm actually not saying at all that they shouldn't train for years and years. They should definitely have to read law. Like, I would never suggest that like you just pluck someone off the street and be like, right, up you come, you're the new Supreme Court justice with no training. What I am saying though is that it's important for people to come from, to represent America truly. You have to represent everyone, not sort of the narrow pathways and such. And that also speaks to the fact that in today's Supreme Court, the issues of America are not upheld and represented because people that have been appointed largely, certainly by Trump, are people who lean towards a worldview that is Republican. And that, not Republican, but is of the sort of...
I can see your socialist leanings coming out when you're talking about in relation to things like capital and all that. The thing is, if you look at the current Supreme Court justices, I don't think they come from any like predominantly wealthy or like upper class backgrounds or anything like that. I might be mistaken. I don't know the personal background of all of the was it 9 Supreme Court justices. I don't know the background of all of them, but I would venture to guess that they would all probably come from either probably middle class backgrounds, maybe some of them from higher class, maybe some of them from lower class. But I would not assume that they were all exclusively from some sort of high class background where all they know in their life is the relation to like capital or anything like that. I think that's a misrepresentation that it's like almost impossible to become like a Supreme Court justice if you don't come from some sort of like these higher backgrounds, I guess.
But it's not just where you come from though, because I agree, it's not as though they're all like born with a silver spoon, but they've largely been to institutions like Yale and Harvard and such. They've largely had the wealth around them through this educational process, and sculpts a lot of how they process law and such, and influences just their ability to access it, and critically and crucially excludes large parts of the population which don't have access to even the things which middle class backgrounds and such would have, and make it less likely. I'm not saying it's impossible.
Would you want someone who didn't go to the most prestigious universities that we have in the United States of America?
Yeah, but access to those universities is also mediated through wealth, because
access to those universities
are
exclusive because it's I mean, Harvard can't take an infinite amount of students, right? So there is a limited amount of people who can be accepted, and it is our like most prestigious institution. So let's take the UK for example, right? What's your prestigious
Oxford and Cambridge?
Oxford and Cambridge, right? You wouldn't. I'm assuming that the top 1% of or like the bottom 10% of the UK is not getting into places like Oxford or Cambridge or anything like that. That it's only going to be like
Yes,
the most the highest level students that you have. So, and would you want if you were
but
choosing someone who was like in the highest quarter land in your own country, would you want them to come from places that weren't from Oxford or Cambridge or anything like that?
well, two things. Firstly, we're not saying that the people shouldn't be trained extremely well. We're saying that to access to access those higher universities and such, it's a lot harder for people who have less beginning with and such, and people who aren't able to afford the cost and stuff to access it. Secondly, though, I think that there is something to say about the fact that people who access the higher reaches of political power and prestige and such are funneled through a few institutions, because inevitably the experiences of those institutions will shape how the people in charge will come to operate the country. The fact that you can only really go to a few top schools and such to be able to access them and get a scholarship or have lots of money, like makes the cultural elements reproduce a little bit. Like there has to be a conversation
okay,
about
so this is
we have everyone.
This is
something we not provide a good education for everyone.
This is something that Trey brought up in my chat, that Ivy League schools have some of the best rates for lower class students and the most generous need based aid in the country. They are so filthy rich that they want the best regardless of background. They shovel money at it.
This is what I'm saying though, like, because sorry, are we going to say something?
Well, I was going to say, you say we're talking about specifically Supreme Court justices, right? You say, well, should we elevate the education system across the entire country to be better? I think that's a different conversation than saying, should Supreme Court justices be coming from the best schools like in the country? Would you agree that that's a sort of a different conversation? You're sort of conflating like two different things together. Like
I would say
having a Supreme Court justice from the most prestigious and the hardest universities to get in the country is different than saying that we need to raise the educational standard of like the rest of the country, right? Like those are two separate concepts.
Yeah, well,
that like
yes and no, because there's of course you want someone to have if someone shows up with like a certificate from I don't know Owen's online course, like you think, okay, well hang on a second, let's just check this again.
Yeah. But so like even if you raise the level of standard and like the level of engagement with the average student of all the other universities in the rest of the country to make it a higher quality, you would still probably only be picking from the most prestigious like law schools in the country for your Supreme Court justices, people graduating from like Yale and Harvard and all that.
That is firstly tackling the raising education for everyone will also involve how we think about what is good education, because it's not as about the other law schools, they're not teaching law, it's the cultural elements and the power concentrated culturally and economically through these schools gives them a better chance of being able to access those positions. And secondly, I think that to go back to what Lakeside Trey was saying, because I can see the chat as well, like they're right. They do want the best amount of, regardless of where they come from and such. But the fact that you still need to be able to raise quite a lot of funding or get the scholarship demonstrates what I'm saying, that unless you have access to capital and wealth and such at some point through your journey, even if it, because I agree, there's some pretty bad accommodation at some good universities as well. And the higher,
well, I think the point that he was making specifically is that if you're good enough, they're going to provide the capital for you to get into these institutions, because that's what they want, the best of the best. They aren't going to be like, well, we have this guy and he's like, the smartest student in like the entire country, but then there's also like Rich McGill, and he's due to his inbreeding, he's a little bit tarded, but his dad is like filthy rich. Harvard is going to go for Harvard is going to go for the guy that's like the smartest guy in the country, regardless of his background, compared to Rich McGill's son. So
that's even that, like the person who has been able to work really hard and such still likely has some things in their life which other people don't have. Like even if
That's not always. No, that's making an assumption. That's making an assumption that the only reason that you're able to get into these institutions is because you have some sort of systemic help allowing you to get into them. I mean,
no, that's not what I'm saying.
Well,
but certainly, like, let's say, okay, worst case scenario, you're someone who parents don't care, school's falling apart, like you're having to walk miles every day, whatever, like, and you're still pushing yourself through law school and such, or pushing yourself through the exams and such to be able to then get noticed by someone at Harvard who then is like, well, you're a great student, I'm going to give you a scholarship. Like, firstly, clearly they're going against the odds, and the odds are what we're targeting. It shouldn't be that way. That's what we're saying.
Well, it's against the odds for anyone to get in, regardless of your economic.
No, but for that person, okay, but for that person, clearly there are some more additional
do you think
things,
it's you think it's like fundamentally easier for Rich McGill just because he has like tutors in order to get into Harvard versus like somebody who doesn't have tutors?
Of course.
Because
of course
it's such a prestigious institution and so many smart people are applying that you truly have to be the best of the best. You can't just like tutor your way like into Harvard. There's no like pay your way formula cheat code. Like, you understand that, right?
No, of course not. But it's clearly like.
But that's like what you're basically insinuating.
No one's saying that like the exam's different for said rich kid and said poor kid. But clearly the rich kid has an advantage in getting to this step because, as you've just said, tutors, a stable household for them to study in, regular food, parents that are able to support. There's clearly advantages, and I think there's also an element of actually.
Well, you're also assuming that you're also taking this as an assumption that they go immediately from out of their household to Harvard. Like, there's people who go out of their household to like a free community college, and then from there they'll get good enough grades that they're able to transfer to Harvard, right? Like, this isn't a one-to-one direction between either a good or a broken household to Harvard.
Of course not. Of course, life is complex and complicated, but at the same time, we can look at the overall portrait of society and say that those who've reached the higher up, by the time you get to the top parts of the political system, yes, you will have influenced with and been influenced by and interacted with lots and lots of resources. And in the process of doing that, many people who enter this system are going to be influenced by it. And that's not to say that they're like immediately met by some like hooded figure that hands them a big packet of cash and they're like, right, now you are one of us. But evidently this has an influence because of the politics that are produced by this system. And in its ugliest form, when enabled by fascists like Trump, we see people in positions of extreme responsibility, like on the court, basically do away with any proper practice. And
I would argue, obviously, Clarence Thomas being the exception here. I don't think they're necessarily ignoring what the Trump administration is doing. I think they're following the Constitution, which intentionally has set very specific limits for the Supreme Court. Like, do you think that Supreme Court justices, when they rule that they are unable to force Trump to like set foreign policy, do you think that they're like intentionally ignoring what the Trump administration is doing? Like through some sort of like cultural aspect of like coming from like Capitol and Harvard and all that?
Well, no, of course there's still things which, like influence them and such beyond just what the president says. But these are mediated and can change over time. It's not as though Trump will now think, yes, I'm going to listen to this decision and not now act again. Like, the fact that there will still be things happening will be then met with more actions from the court, which may lean a certain different way. Like, the fact that there's still, the fact that some decisions aren't just immediately given to Trump no matter what happens, doesn't change the fact that the court is mediated by and influenced by the social world.
Okay, so what specific decisions can you think of off the top of your head, or maybe not off the top of your head, you can look them up as well, that you think Trump is like unduly influencing the Supreme Court on, or that has previously influenced,
like the wider structures and such,
or the wider structures that, like, let's say that they're specifically ignoring the Constitution for the sake of pushing some sort of agenda. It doesn't matter whose agenda it is or what sort of or some sort of like societal bias or anything like that. What can you think of that the Supreme Court, they're ignoring the Constitution specifically to do that?
Well, think about the numerous attacks on democracy that the Trump administration has.
No,
Trump himself.
Hold on. We can agree the Trump administration is doing this. We're talking about specifically the Supreme Court. So, what has the Supreme Court done specifically that you could say like is pushing this sort of like agenda? That this sort of like would you?
It's like in response in the intermediary years between Trump administrations when they were trying to prosecute Trump for his actions regarding January the 6th. The court ruled in Trump. The court helped Trump in that regard, in the sense that.
Well, they also helped Biden in that regard. That wasn't. They didn't. The ruling wasn't to protect Donald Trump. The ruling was that the executive, that there's already a mechanism in place, and that the Constitution and the founders have both heavily implied that the president could not be prosecuted for official presidential actions.
On paper, sure, but the real-term impact of that is that Trump.
Well, that's the difference between ruling based off of what the Constitution says and ruling based off of what you consider to be good for the government. The Supreme Court is a institution that rules based off the Constitution, whether it's healthy or not for democracy. We can argue that, like I would argue that there probably should be some sort of there probably should be some sort of amendment put in place bringing back presidential immunity. But that doesn't mean that I disagree with the court's ruling. I think the court ruled correctly insofar that it went along with the Constitution.
They interpreted the stuff written, and even then, I think there's an element of like you said, like there should be an amendment. How do we get to the process of amending the Constitution? How easy is that?
2/3 majority followed by ratification of the states,
which then is something else, which is mediated through a structure. Like when I'm talking about structures, I'm not talking about just one sort of set group, right? It's a thing which is affected throughout society, ripples across society.
Well, it's probably
so, as you've just said.
Well,
go ahead. Sorry,
I was gonna say it's probably a good thing that it's spread out, right? Because otherwise, you would have one administration in particular changing all the rules just because it was politically convenient to them. I mean, like, my God, could you imagine if the president could change the Constitution with a simple majority in Congress without any sort of
of course,
that would be terrifying.
At the same time, of course, but at the same time, though, there needs to be like there should have been something done. And again, I'm not saying this is conservatism hold a hand up, like it's Biden's administration here, but it's also the wider structure of the system needed to do something to say, okay, here is someone who actively sent his MAGA lot to the Capitol to actually try and overhaul an election, to literally go and take and zip ties and stuff to try and get the representatives and such. Right?
Very bad thing.
Something has to be done. Exactly, but things were not done. But partly because the systems to actually getting to changing things and making things appropriately able to deal with.
But the systems were designed in a certain way. They were not. The Supreme Court wasn't designed to basically take the president out of power because of January 6th. That's something for for Congress to do with an impeachment process. Like that's how our Constitution was designed. We can't just ignore the Constitution and expect the Supreme Court to do this thing just because we think that it's like the right thing to do. Sadly, or maybe not sadly, that's just a way a system works. Unless you want some sort of like anarchist system in which we're just going to change things on a whim if we think that's like the right thing to do.
It's not changing things on a whim, though, is it? It's identifying a major flaw. They've essentially.
Well, if you think it's a major flaw, then you have to implement we have an amendment system. That is the way that you change it. It's not for the Supreme Court to change itself. I guess the Supreme Court isn't meant to amend the Constitution by itself for itself. It's meant to interpret what already exists and implement those decisions within the power given.
Yeah. But the interpretation is not, they aren't independent, though, is what I'm trying to say. They are influenced by the same things influencing the Senate, the House of Representatives, the president and such, like all the sort of factors which have gone into producing the moment we're in now have.
Well, the only influence that I can think of
right?
specifically would be outright bribery, which, again, Justice Thomas,
pretty big issue, right?
That definitely can be addressed. But outside of outright bribery, there isn't any, unless you think outright bribery is like part of like the institutional thing. What other pressures can you think of that the Supreme Court is like being pressured to do? Like, how can the president pressure the Supreme Court outside of like directly giving them like a big wad of cash?
Well, we have to look at how MAGA conducts itself to sort of see some of the pressures that might be exerted on the individual. Ultimately, a justice is a human being, and given Trump's propensity for political violence and the rhetoric that he's used, and the fact that his fans literally conduct themselves in a way which is not cohesive to a cooperative society, democratic society, there is going to be some risk for people, especially those of if you are a conservative Republican appointed judge, and you're going to hold up some element of actually we've got to look at these laws and see that Trump isn't just following them. There is now a crosshair of some caliber on your back, because you haven't been appointed to uphold the justice and laws and such. You've been appointed to make it easier for a Republican president.
So how do you explain the fact that the Supreme Court, in spite of all of these Republican appointees, still votes against Donald Trump, and they still, even if it's like extremely politically inconvenient, like the Supreme Court will vote against like the tariff thing, for example. How do you explain that the Supreme Court says that the president is unable to implement tariffs if they're influenced by MAGA and by all these outside influences, pressures them to vote with Donald Trump?
Well, they're influenced by it, aren't they? I'm not saying that it's like a robot where you just press a button. It's like, yes, I will now vote Republican forever. Like it's something which is going
the thing is, like, then how do you prove influence then if, like, well, sometimes they're voting against, or sometimes they are voting for? That's not an example of influence. It's just an example of.
But we look at the fabric of the social world to see these things. Like we've got to look at things qualitatively. Like, because ultimately we are all human beings, and the idea that we're going to have like Professor X powers and read into someone's mind, who Professor X is? I might just
I know who Professor X is. Don't worry. Maybe one day I'll shave my head bald, and I'll get in a wheelchair and I'll cosplay as that one
time. But you know what I mean? Like we obviously, like, we're never going to have telepathic powers, but we've got to think critically about what people do and say and how our thoughts and actions build the social world, and think about critically what we can do to improve it. I did want to come on to you mentioned the Democrat. People believe, like, people on a sort of more liberal Democratic side sort of thinking, where's our MAGA movement? We got a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, wait, hold on. Before we continue with that, we're at 2 hours and 13 minutes into the stream right now.
My goodness.
I don't know how long you specifically want to go, or how long
I'm happy to go a bit further. I mean, I've got a bit more time. It is getting a little bit later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've got a bit more time. I feel like I wrote down, at the start you had those like points.
The whole the bulletin list. Yeah.
And I feel like there's a few we haven't even. There's
no. I think we spent a lot of this time. I think the first hour and a half was just on fiscal conservatism or the fiscal laissez-faire politics and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about how you felt about this, but I'm happy to do a part 2 at some time.
Oh, I'm down to do part 2 sometime as well. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, we maybe we can touch on Democrat MAGA-esque type things here, and then save the other points we touch on for like part 2, just to save my voice and my tiredness in this late hour at the UK.
Are you? Hold on, I gotta know. This is I gotta stereotype you for a second. Are you a big tea drinker?
More coffee, to be honest.
Coffee, okay.
I do like tea though. Tea's nice.
Okay. Is that like a big thing in the UK? Do people, You know,
Oh, yeah,
they'll
massively.
stereotypically get up their
Wow.
tea and crumpets and.
I mean, maybe not the crumpets, but yeah, tea. Lots of people drink tea.
Okay.
I reckon coffee's making a bit of a is catching up though. I think coffee.
Okay. You're finally coming to the civilized world.
Well, indeed. What was I going to say? Yeah, so you said earlier about people on the sort of more Democrat persuasion taking a look at MAGA's success and thinking, yeah, we need our own MAGA. We need to have the same thing, but for the left or whatever, or for our party. And I think that there's definitely an element of wanting that same success in the sense that if you look at MAGA sort of through just a quick glance, you can see they've got a lot of people talking about their politics in their way, and they now have a lot of political power. But I think one of the reasons that I don't think it is quite the same is that outside of like a few pundits and a few people looking at it briefly, the core things that make MAGA what it is aren't really going to have the same appeal on certainly not the left, but with liberal sort of leaning people. One of the things, make America great again. Now, obviously, America is 340 million people. It's a big nation. But the specific themes of nationalism and patriotism and protectionism, America first, literally in it, right? They are things quite unique to the space on the right and far right, I would say.
It's unique insofar that no one else tries to take it from them, or no one else tries to break into that sphere. I would argue that no rhetoric is unique. It's just that people just let it be that way. People thought that like appealing to the average worker of like we're gonna do this to like make your life better. Everyone thought that that would always be something sort of like on the left in American politics. And then here comes Donald Trump talking about how, what, the system is broken, it's working against you. And, I'm one of the elites, I know why it's working against you, and I'm going to make it better for you, Rhetorical devices and rhetorical positions are only yours as long as the other person doesn't actually try to go for them.
Rhetorical device, right, is as you said, right, people use them from rhetoric is part of language, and so people who want to be convincing use rhetoric. I don't think anyone's going to come out and say, yeah, my interest is getting a payout from ExxonMobil, so I want to, I'm going to write them a tax break or whatever. But I would dispute the fact that Trump was necessarily speaking to the American worker. He was speaking to a subset of American workers that appeal, that are in the sort of conservative space. And whilst he's happy and Republicans are happy for many to join, there's certainly people who are in the working class who are excluded from this narrative that aren't in left-wing and liberal spaces. So, for instance, if you are an LGBTQ person, of which there are millions in America, you are not welcome in this movement. You are the sort of person that is being spoken against to appeal to this movement. Racist
you
elements,
clearly have not met a gay MAGA person or a gay Trump supporter, which they exist, and to a larger degree than what you would think.
Yeah, no, I have no doubt there's plenty. Clearly, there is an anti-LGBTQ theme from this movement when they spend millions on the anti-trans scare stuff, the get the gay out of schools, all the like in Florida, for instance, where they're making a big show of paving over rainbow flags and stuff, and getting rid of all sort of visible signs of pride and such, right? Like, you do that because you're appealing to the sense of, you're saying there's something wrong with America and gesturing towards visible marginalized people. Trump mocking that disabled journalist well back in 2015 or so when he's doing the horrible hand gesture and such. Like, the appeal to normative America here is also an appeal to a version of America that excludes many marginalized people, as fascism does, because it creates that other and says, this
I would agree that there's an other. It's more of it's just even though that there's an other, the other is not as clear as you would see in previous fascist movements, I guess. Like,
Well, in the sense that, like,
because you
obviously,
see like Trump taking in historically high like Latino votes, for example. Like that doesn't track with the I guess the other amount, the other
okay.
narrative of him trying to like specifically uh, disenfranchise label all Latinos as others. I mean, you could say that his deportation policy certainly didn't help him, especially with the comments about Puerto Ricans. That definitely did not help his vote either. But I don't think I just don't think the other is as defined as you see in previous sort of like fascist movements.
I mean, I agree to an extent. We are an intersectional society. There's certainly people who are gonna. It's not as though it's like 1930s Germany where Hitler's coming out and actively saying, "Yeah, here are groups we're gonna concretely write our laws against and such." To an extent, however, the fact that some, more, there's a higher percentage of Latinx, etc. voters, Hispanic. You've got lots of different words for it. That population voted for Trump.
I would not call
a
Latino person Latinx ever. They will get highly offended if you say that. that's a chronically online thing.
We don't really have. We would just say like British Spanish or something. Like we don't really use.
That's probably a more respectful term than calling them Latinx. I'll just say that.
Sure. Sure. The what was I going to say? What's my thought? Okay, yeah. So people voting in an election is different to people in society at large. There's always going to be people who fascism appeals to, and I'm not saying that's because they are die-moral Nazis, but that the elements of fascism are going to have some accord with people who are already in sort of some elements of right-wing thought, and it's going to be felt differently in different places. So there will be some people who, despite being targeted by some of the rhetoric of fascism and being in the crosshairs because they're not white, for instance, are going to like the idea of, especially if they are Americans and they believe in the values of American nationalism and such, who are going to vote for someone like Trump who wants to kick out the illegals or whatever. And the fact that Trump then has a policy with ICE that targets them anyway doesn't contradict their it's not, that doesn't mean that he didn't do what he said he was going to do. That demonstrates that fascism will target people even when they agree with elements of fascism, in the same way that people in Nazi Germany got targeted, even, and despite probably even liking elements of Nazism at first, right?
I mean, yeah, kind of, but I would also argue that is like you're correct in which that there was people like Jews for Hitler, for example, in Nazi Germany, which was wild to even like imagine.
I can't imagine that was a particularly major thing though.
It was this famous Jewish leader who wanted to have all the Jews like immigrate to Madagascar or something like that. And apparently, he was like one of the last Jews to actually be like incarcerated by the Hitler regime. I think it was like 1939 before he was sent to the camps, I guess. But there certainly were. You see this historically. That I guess there are groups who, in spite of the fact that they might be targeted, would support them. But like the targeting of illegals, for example, while that does hurt like the Latino community, you still see not only historic amounts of Latino support for Donald Trump, but also historic amounts of Latinos participating in organizations like ICE. I don't know if you've ever seen some of like the ICE agents when they occasionally have like their masks will fall down and they'll see like, holy shit, that guy whose Tio is that? Whose nephew is that?
Because there's all, like, as we've said, the society we live in is different to one 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. So despite the fact that we have seen the constructions of race as we saw in the colonial days and the pre-civil rights days be deconstructed, and there are people of non-white status in law enforcement and such, and even in an organization like ICE, that doesn't change the fact that Trump's movement is still a racist one and does still have those qualities.
Well,
like
yeah,
the fact that someone can be in those organizations and have it doesn't
I would
mean
argue
that it's
in a way it's
any
almost
contradiction.
It is kind of racist, but then it's also partially I would almost say post-racial. I don't know if you've ever heard of like the post-racial sort of fascism.
That's not. Well, yeah, but then at the same, like someone. I mean, it goes back to the idea of like racism and such. Like black people can say things which are racist because a racist statement is a statement on the way race is mediated in society. It's not like the fact that someone says something which is contradictory and harmful to what you would think if you looked at them doesn't change the thing they have said and engaged with in racism. It was racist. So yeah, to draw it back to the sort of Democrat MAGA type conversation, the reason I don't think it's a case of copy and paste from Trump to a potential Democrat type movement is that you wouldn't have that traction gain the same support in that sort of circle because the rhetoric of saying like, say, I don't know, these people eat cats and dogs, the
framework is ultimately different, but what I'm concerned about is you don't necessarily have to use race as a way to rally your base, I guess, like making it a sort of, I guess in the left it would be a class distinction of rallying, like we gotta go against these economic elites, and that's something that I'm concerned about. That you could use the exact same rhetoric with, I guess, a different. You could, but the same rhetoric. I mean, like rhetorical tactics, not necessarily the same rhetoric of like, oh, we're gonna deport all the white people or something like that. Yeah.
But can you see why race is used by why? Because you're right, you don't have to organize it around race, but there's a reason that MAGA does, and it's because, especially in a country like America,
I don't think it's at the forefront as what like they don't say, oh, we're going after all the Mexicans, like that's not the rhetoric that's necessarily being used. Like you could argue that it's racist that Donald Trump is going after illegals, I guess, but yeah, I just the race element is not specifically at the forefront. So I can't imagine the rallying on the left happening even without a race-based movement, and rallying in a similar way to what MAGA does, in which you try to target one specific group in order to rally. Rallying basically around hate is what I'm concerned about.
But even that, like the hatred which is seen from MAGA isn't just like some, like I feel like when we talk about racism, we often envision some like Klansman coming out and it's like, yes, I am racist. I firmly have this like entrenched view. Racism as an organizing sort of structure and as like a factor in how people think and such is mediated through many forms in our language, in how our structures work and such, in the history of the countries we live in. And so these influences are a driving factor, not even in the direct sense of like people who actively say, yeah, America should not have other races. It's just a way of people thinking about issues like immigration, like welfare and such, and how that is applied. Because you're quite right, there's plenty of people who come from, say, a Mexican background, and like, yeah, we support illegal immigrants getting deported, and if you didn't get your checks and such, you should be gone, and then end up getting caught in the crosshairs themselves, and end up, even though they have documentation, getting deported because ICE thought they were, they didn't have some paperwork on them in that exact moment or whatever, so they grabbed them and such. Like that demonstrates that even though there are people who don't view this as a racially based thing, the way race is constructed in America still is massively what has motivated and orchestrated much of this thing. And as well, with this, I think you have to again look at why race comes into it, and that is linked in again our broader criticism of the structure of America with the money that is made from it. When you put someone in incarceration, you put them in a position in which they are more easily able to be profited from. The mass incarceration policies of the US. I mean, you're chuckling, but
I am chuckling, yeah, because
truth, right?
how is the Trump administration, which is instituted historical amounts of debt in order to deport people, at all implementing some sort of profit by holding these people in detention centers? Like there is no profit. In fact, I would say the deportation of illegal immigrants in the United States, that is antithetical towards any sort of profit motive for like capital and corporations. Because what are people who come to this country illegally going to provide? They're going to provide cheap labor, which is ultimately good for a corporation. Yeah. So by deporting them, you're ultimately hurting the capital, and you're hurting these institutions that you say would be normally be profiting off of them. So how does that integrate into your framework?
Okay, so on some notes, I in some parts of the network of the economy, I agree. Yes, it's incoherent and terrible to do this to your economy because, as you say, it's a huge expenditure of money, which doesn't actually benefit economies in ways that it should. However, this doesn't contest the goal of the capitalists and fascists and such doing this at the other end of the system, who are, say, making profit from there being an influx of prisons and detention centers built. Who
these people in detention centers aren't making work though. I mean, these are all publicly owned institutions. It's not like there's the Coca-Cola TM detention center in like Chicago or anything like that. Like it's like I don't believe that
publicly owned.
These detention centers, like
on top of
that, what is it?
Many of them aren't. And then on top of that, the functioning of these places requires many different market activities, which involves the free market policies, which corporations get contracts to do. Said corporations are friendly with the Trump administration and therefore benefit from receiving more prisoners and detained people and such, because they then get a bigger contract next time. They get more money to produce more activities, which then raises their profile and such. And there's also an element of control too. If you damage the economy and such, if you have more capital, you can pick up the pieces in a better way. In many ways, the destruction of a functioning economy is useful for a fascist government because they then have the power to be able to concentrate their power in their own way.
The collective destruction of the U.S. economy generally doesn't like. I don't think there has ever been a historic example. Well, maybe if you look at like failed regimes where there's just no economy forever, but in a modern capitalist economy, the destruction of it just for the sake of consolidating it among a few people, I think that ultimately hurts everyone again, even the people like consolidating.
I agree. Power. It does ultimately hurt everyone,
including the people consolidating the power. So there's no incentive structure to do that at all.
It's not a decision that's been reached through logic and thinking about the long term. It's an immediate reaction in the pursuit of power. That's the sort of point. When the production of people like Trump isn't just because they are uniquely evil, awful people. The sort of whole point of what I've been trying to say across this conversation, the theme, is that the factors in our social world lead people like Trump to do terrible things in the pursuit of their power. And that's why we have to look more broadly to addressing how we can be anti-Trump. Your yawn is going to make me yawn.
Yeah.
I feel like,
sorry about that.
No, it's not at all. Yeah. I was actually about to say, but
you want to wrap it up right here, and we could have a part 2 another time.
Yeah, maybe head to our conclusion of sorts for tonight, and do part 2 perhaps.
I don't think there's any conclusion. I guess it's more of a matter of. I think our outlook is very, very different. I can tell that your outlook on the world is very based off of capital and based off of how capital is concentrated and sort of incentive structures in regards to capital culturally and politically and societally. I don't know how the fuck you said that. Through society. And I think our sort of our differing in worldview sort of disagrees with, I guess, prescriptions as well as the diagnosis as well. That's sort of like my closing
Maybe.
argument.
I mean, I suppose there is an element of natural disagreement and such, but I think there are areas that we do share consensus on, I suppose. And
I think the consensus that we share is that Donald Trump is doing bad things.
But even then, I feel like there's you speak to some people and it's like there's no interest in the well-being of other people and such. I do feel like there is that in between us, but yeah, I suppose we'll have to explore other disagreements a little bit more next time. I am sure there is some more consensus to be found.
Yeah, we'll DM each other and we'll have instead of me listing off like this big giant list that we barely got through, we should have like a couple talking points we should go over.
I mean, well, if we do part 2, then we just we just pick up where we left off, right? The things you didn't get to this one and go over next time. But anyway, thank you for having me on, and
I appreciate you coming on. You're entertaining my viewers, maintaining a pretty high view count for my channel.
Awesome. Well, you take care, and I suppose this is where the end of the live section, right? Like you'll.
Well, I'll stop the recording here, and then I'll upload it to a Google Drive. I think I'm gonna end the stream here as well.
Wonderful. Well, yeah. Take care, chat, and all.
Yeah. Have a good day.